Today, folks, you're going to hear the most extraordinary story of reincarnation that has ever been told in human history. There are one or two other stories that I know of from Western people in the West that are almost as compelling, but there is nothing quite like the story you are going to hear about a boy called James Leininger. The book his parents, Bruce and Andrea, have written about him and about his experiences called Soul Survivor, the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. And I have to tell you frankly, usually when I do an interview, I will perhaps skim the book, read it. I give it about 2 hours. I started this book yesterday afternoon when I had a couple of hours of time set aside for it. I finished reading and rereading it at 1 o'clock in the morning. This is an incredible, life-changing experience to any of us who are tired of and ceasing to believe the relentlessly materialistic description of human life that is fed to us from earliest childhood. I will tell you from my own personal experiences, you know, who read my website, who read unknowncountry.com, I have come to believe for personal reasons in an afterlife. But this story, I think, frankly, Bruce and Andrea, I think this story proves reincarnation. And welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Well, I must first say, the amount of effort that these people have put into finding out the mystery behind their little boy's amazing memories is truly heroic. I mean, you guys worked and worked and worked. Bruce, I've never read anything as obsessive. You worked, guys. That was very impressive.
It was a lot of work, but it was a labor of love, and it was a labor of really wanting to make sure that whatever it was that our son was experiencing, and when we first started going through this whole scenario with James, right after his second birthday is when it all started, our ultimate goal was that whatever he was going through or was experiencing, that we could somehow help him resolve this, and that he would not have any fears or phobias, that he would just grow up and be healthy and normal without any, weird paranoias or being self-conscious about anything.
Yes. Well, now let's go back to that period.
Okay.
He's 2 and he's something began to happen. Could you tell us what that was like right at the beginning when this began to manifest itself in your lives?
Well, it really started, I think what really caught my attention first was when he started having the nightmares, which started about 2 weeks after his second birthday. But even before that, James had a love for airplanes. And initially, I have a nephew. I know of other little boys or little girls. They love dolls, or they love trucks, or they love Thomas the Tank Engine. They fall in love with something. James fell in love with planes. He loved planes from the first time he looked out the window of the car seat and saw one flying overhead. He was fascinated. So even by his second birthday, he received a lot of airplane gifts.
Now, however, fascinated is one way to put it. Another way to put it is to ask you a question, Bruce. How did you feel when he kept saying every time you started out on a journey, Daddy's airplane crash, big fire?
Well, that was unsettling, and there were actually 2 other things that, were baffling, and one of them was unsettling. He also had a behavior where with his toy airplanes, he would incessantly crash them into a coffee table that we had in the family room, and it would go on and on for hours. The other thing that he would do is I bought him a Blue Angel video called It's a Kind of Magic at an air museum that I took him to shortly before we came here to Lafayette. And he would stand in front of that video for hours and hours. It got to the point to where he would be grunting and groaning with the pilot as they were watching the pilots fly in the cockpit. And So all of these things were disturbing. The the comments about the airplane crash going on the way to the airport, that was not that made me mad.
Of course it did. It would
Don't
make you
say
very
that.
mad. But you must have been quite curious about why he would keep saying that.
Well,
it was baffling. Yeah, it was very baffling.
And initially it started with the nightmares. The first time he had one, I never heard a nightmare like that. I mean, everyone who has a small child knows that they cry in the night and you go take care of them. I had never heard a nightmare where it sounded like he was being, like someone was killing him, like he was being attacked. It was much larger than a regular nightmare. So I ran down the hall. I couldn't figure out for a couple months what he was dreaming about. He'd be laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling, screaming bloody murder. And, I'd try and console him. I'd pick him up and I'd, hug him and get him to calm down again and put him back down to bed. But after that first nightmare, they just kept coming. The next night he had one. He may skip a night. He may have skipped 2 nights. But they kept coming with regular frequency. It wasn't until about 2 months into the nightmares that I was coming down the hall for the bazillionth time. And, he was pretty articulate early on. He could speak early and he could speak well. But during the nightmares, I wasn't able to pick out what he was yelling. And it was about 2 months into it, I was coming down the hallway again, and it just clicked in my brain. Maybe he developed enough articulation that my brain finally picked it up. But he was saying, airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out.
Right. That was going to be my next question. I'm actually on page 47 of your book. How did you feel then? Because it wasn't just that he said that. There was something else going on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I stopped dead in my tracks, and it was like every hair in my body stood up. And I thought, oh, my gosh, is that what he's been dreaming all this time? So I went back down the hallway. I tried to wake Bruce up. He was not happy about getting up and having to go see this scenario going on, but he got out of bed and came down the hall, and he heard it too, because before he even got to James's bedroom, he just stopped in his tracks and looked at me, and his mouth was open, and I'm like, I know. So we went in and woke him up. The next day, Bruce and I were talking about it, and we both thought there has to be a logical explanation. Let's go back, and I'm like, was there anything at the airplane museum? Because shortly before, I guess James was about 18 months old, and he took him to the Kavanaugh Flight Museum in Dallas. But that had been about 6 months before he started having the nightmares. And, I asked him, was there anything that he could remember from them? Was there anything about fire, about plane crashes? And Bruce said, no, it was just these static airplane displays. There was World War I, World War II, Korea, all the way up to current. There's, 10, 15 planes in each hangar, but they're just kind of sitting there looking all nice behind these roped barricades. There was no videos or anything that he would have seen a burning plane. And 6 months had passed, and nothing had come negative from that. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of too far ago to be relevant. So then we thought, maybe it's the Blue Angel video. So we sat down and watched the Blue Angel video from start to finish. There was nothing about burning planes, nothing negative. It was just a wholesome video about how the Blue Angels put their flight team together and how they practice and come up with their routines. And, it was very patriotic and something you would let your 2-year-old watch. So we just kept thinking there had to be a logical explanation.
Now, Bruce, when you were with him at the Air Museum, was there anything about his behavior that struck you as at the least unusual?
Yeah, when we went into the hangar that had it was mostly they were all World War II vintage aircraft. He didn't want to leave that hangar, and every time we went to walk across the tarmac to get to one of the additional hangars. I think there were 3 or 4 hangars that had aircraft in them. We'd get partway across the opening to go to the other hangar, and all of a sudden he'd be trotting back toward the World War II hangar. And he had to go back in there. He didn't want to go anywhere else. And what he did the first time we were there is he would just stand there looking around and pointing, and it was the best word is mesmerized. He wasn't saying anything. It was just mesmerized is the right word. And
wow. And so you were probably both of you quite perplexed. Now let's get back to that really the first night that information began to flow. You told, Andrea, you said James is talking about the little man,
Mm-hmm.
and then you guys asked James, tell Daddy, or you did, Bruce, tell Daddy what you were telling, or no, you did, Andrea. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
tell Daddy what you were telling me before. What then happened?
James had never spoken about his nightmares in waking hours. He always woke up happy, and he didn't seem upset or want to talk about the nightmares. It was like he didn't remember them. So I never pushed it. I did try and ask him a few times, what did you dream about last night? And he never remembered. I couldn't get an answer. So for the first time, I was reading him a bedtime story in my bed, and he just laid down on his back like he did when he was having his nightmares and started kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And he goes, Mama, the little man's going like this. And he laid on his back and kicked his feet up, and he goes, the little man's going, ooh, 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 can't get out, can't get out. And I said, well, you talk about the little man in your dreams. Who's the little man? And James said, me.
Oh, my. And what went
and
through
that's,
your
my hair stood up, and I said, let me go get Daddy. So I went down the hall, got Bruce, said, he's talking about the little man. Come listen. So that's when Bruce came and sat on the bed, and I said, tell Daddy what you were telling me. And he said, Daddy, the little man's going like this. And he lay down on his back and did the same thing. And Bruce said, well, who's the little man? And James said, me. So Bruce kind of got down on the bed with him and said, what happened to your plane? And James said, it crashed on fire. And Bruce said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, who shot your plane? And he rolled his eyes like he'd had enough of this retarded questioning. And he rolled his eyes and he goes, the Japanese!
At that age.
Right.
I mean, and this
he
is...
wasn't even 2.5 yet.
Okay, we're going to take a little break. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Next week, Linda Moulton Howe will be back with us talking about a videotaped cattle abduction in England.
You're listening to Dreamland. Serious wonder spoken here.
We're back. I'm talking to Bruce and Andrea Leininger about Soul Survivor, the story of their sons and their recovery of memories of a past life of his. It is the most extraordinary book about reincarnation ever written. It is the reincarnation of this little boy who had been a World War II fighter pilot, and quite frankly, it's indisputable. It's proof, I think, in my mind, and I've been close to believing this for some time, having started out with all of this stuff as a complete skeptic. Nevertheless, we do survive death, and I think this book, Soul Survivor, does tell us that at least sometimes we return. The book's website and the Leininger's website is soulsurvivor-book.com. The book is available in any bookstore, I am sure, and do not miss this. I know this listenership of 250,000 people has a high level of interest, so you could really, if you all go out and buy a copy, you're going to put it back on the bestseller list, where it belongs. So
great.
Listen up, folks. This is important stuff. It's very validating. It has made me personally feel very different about my life. And now, Bruce, you were not at all open to the idea even of reincarnation initially, were you?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, I was less than closed.
Yeah.
Or I was more than closed, however you want to describe. I was cynical about the whole subject.
Oh, he was. This was not going to happen. You know, my mother's the first person. I've been discussing James's nightmares with her for months, and she's the first person who said maybe he's experiencing a past life. When I tried to raise that subject with Bruce, he was adamant that whatever it wasn't that.
Yeah.
That's not going to be happening in our house. There's no such thing as past lives. There's no such thing in reincarnation. This is not happening in our house. It's something that is not that.
Well, and the way I felt about it is because of I have 4 other children from a previous marriage. I never witnessed anything like this to this extreme or anywhere even close to it. I felt that there really needed to be some kind of rational explanation to it that was explainable or where it could explain away what was happening. I just had no idea that at the end of the day it would be exactly what we're talking about, which is reincarnation.
Which, yeah, exactly. And so here you are now. The story began to build, and it came to a moment where you had something close to proof, not final proof, but proof that something really terribly unusual was happening when the name of a certain ship appeared. Tell us about that.
Well, it was another night, kind of like the night where James just started spontaneously talking about it, and this was probably a month or maybe 6 weeks after he told us that the Japanese had shot his plane down. Exact same scenario. I was reading to him in my bed, reading him his bedtime story. He was getting groggy. He started talking about the little man again. I went and got Bruce, came back, and we started another line of questioning with him. And Bruce said, "Do you remember?" We kept saying, "Do you remember what your name was?" And he always said James, but that is his name. So we thought, well, he's just confused. He's too little to really understand what we're trying to, because it takes you forever just to teach your own child their own name. So we gave up on that line of questioning, and then Bruce asked him, "What kind of plane did you fly?" And he said, "A Corsair." And I said, "A Corsair? What is that?" And he goes, "It's a World War II plane."
Right.
And then Bruce said, "Do you remember where your boat took off, or where your plane took off from?" And he said, "It took off from a boat." And Bruce said, "Do you remember the name of your boat?" And he said, "Natoma." And Bruce and I looked at each other, and Bruce said, "Natoma? That sounds kind of Japanese to me." And James got annoyed again. He goes, "No, it is American." And Bruce said, "Well, do you remember what your name was?" And he said, "James." And so I finally said, "Do you remember anyone else that you flew with, any friends or anything like that?" And he said, Jack Larson.
Now, in the book, you were confused. Right. You thought he was saying he was Jack Larson, had been Jack Larson.
That's right. And it just goes to show that for both Andrea and I, the issue of him saying I'm James, it's James in the dream. It wasn't a connection we made right at the beginning. You don't sit around saying, "Oh, my kid's having a nightmare about being a fighter pilot. He must be reincarnated." It's not the first conclusion that you really jump to.
No.
At all. And so on that basis, when he gave me the name of the ship and I discovered that it was really a ship, that made it still makes the hair stand up on my neck. And then when he gave us the name Jack Larson, I began a futile search for Jack Larson, thinking he was dead, and subsequently discovered almost 2 years later that he was alive and well and living in Springdale, Arkansas. Those two items, plus then him telling me about being shot down at or during the Battle of Iwo Jima, gave me three key pieces of information that, I could understand where the word Corsair came from, although there was no Corsair at the Cabin Flight Museum when we visited it. I could understand him saying something about the Japanese or some of these other things, but to come up with three really obscure pieces of information that were factual.
I mean, the fact that the Natoma existed and that Jack Larson had actually shipped on it.
That's right.
Coming from a 2-year-old.
That's correct.
Who didn't know either the name of the ship or could not have known the name, and certainly could not have known anything about the ship's company or the airmen aboard.
Oh, no, there's no way.
There was just no way. I mean, I sat there for a long time last night thinking to myself, what does this mean for us, the living? What do we, it must have changed the way you think about human beings, about
Absolutely.
Our lives tremendously.
Oh, it has. It's changed how I feel about everything, and there's things that, in the course of editing and writing a book, we went through about 9 edits of that book.
Of course you did.
And everyone wants to leave their fingerprint on the book. So, editors took things out, we rewrote things, some of our literary agent didn't think certain things needed to be in there, and we would fight back and forth, rewrite. But after a while, every time you get the book back, I gave up reading it word for word to make sure that after a while I was just like, let's just get done with the book. So I didn't realize that something had been omitted, and I didn't catch it to get it put back in there. But one of the things that was really significant for me is, and I may be jumping on something that you want to talk about later, but it's it's about the 3 G.I. Joes, when Billy, Walter, and Leon came up.
Yeah, let's go into the 3 G.I. Joes right now then, because I obviously was going to bring it up, but you have, so fabulous. Let's just tell us about the 3 G.I. Joes.
Well, James, loving the military and loving his planes, for gifts for Christmas or his birthday, people would give him G.I. Joe action figures. And the first one he got, he named Billy. And I thought, well, that's a great name for a G.I. Joe. Who doesn't want a G.I. Joe named Billy? And he loved Billy. He played with him. He slept with him. He took baths with him. Billy was like his best friend. But he also had an imaginary friend named Billy. So I thought, well, he's just trying to put a face with his, with his little imaginary friend. Then about 6 months later, he got another one for his birthday. And this one was blonde and ripped and, a really good-looking G.I. Joe. And he named him Leon. And so Bruce and I would always kind of secretly laugh to ourselves, like Billy and Leon. James always came up with really strange names, but we never asked him about it.
Not little boy names at all.
Yeah, we didn't know any, we weren't friends with any Leons or, James did any classmates named Leon. It's kind of an old-fashioned name. So, but we just kind of laughed it off and didn't ask him about it. He had a stuffed dog that he named Balthazar. So James kind of came up with kind of strange names. But then he got the third one for Christmas about a year later. And he was all excited because this G.I. Joe came with a foot locker and it had all kinds of equipment and gear and clothes and boots and guns. And he went in his room to go outfit all the 3 G.I. Joes in new outfits. And he was in there dressing them, and Bruce and I were having that moment at Christmas where you stand there in the door watching your kid, and it's like a happy Christmas day. And so Bruce said, "James, what are you going to name your new G.I. Joe?" And James just looked up and said, "Walter."
Walter. So you've got Leon, Walter, and Billy.
And Bruce, we just started laughing, and Bruce said, "Well, why did you name your G.I. Joes Billy, Walter, and Leon?" And James just said, "Because that's who met me when I got to heaven."
Now, this interested me greatly because you're now talking about memories of the between the lives period he went through.
Right.
And now, tell us a little bit about they met him when he went to heaven, but there is more to it. I mean, there's a reason they met.
That's when Bruce went running down. We closed the door. We went running down the hall to the office. Closed the office door. Bruce is like digging through stacks of papers, throwing papers around. By this time, folks,
this house is packed with research. Bruce has become the total obsessive. He's gone from being the total skeptic to wanting to dig this thing out in a way that was just extraordinary. So go ahead.
Oh, it was, and I always, Bruce has heard me use this analogy 100 times, but it's so fitting for Bruce. If you've seen that movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
I thought about that very
where
thing.
Richard Dreyfuss is like throwing the neighbor's bushes in the window, and he's making that big mountain of dirt on top of the dining room table. That's pretty much how Bruce got.
Well, I've lived the experience of finding an impossible, unacceptable unknown in my life. I know that obsession very well, Bruce. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yep. But let's go on with who they were.
Yeah, well, what happened is, I was curious when he named the second G.I. Joe Leon, because by that time, one of the names on the original roster of men I had found killed on the Toma Bay contained Leon, name Leon. It didn't have any name Billy on it, but I subsequently discovered that after going to the Natoma Bay reunion. But by the time he gave the name Walter, and each of those dolls had characteristics in terms of their hair color that was even more spellbinding, because Billy Peeler, who he named Billy after, had brown hair. Leon Connor had blonde hair, and Walter Devlin, they called Big Red, had red hair. But all three of those pilots flew in the same squadron with James M. Houston, Jr., and
Yes.
each of them had died for various reasons prior to Houston dying, although in the same series of actions from October 1944 to November 1944, and then Houston died in March of 1945.
Now we're jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves, folks. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to tell you who Houston is. We'll be right back.
Right.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
Today we're talking to Bruce and Andrea Leininger, the authors of Soul Survivor, the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot who happens to be their son James. It is the most convincing reincarnation story ever put on paper, as I have said. Their website is soulsurvivor-book.com. Do get this. This is empowering. In fact, it is mind-changing and life-changing because there's basically no way that this little 2-year-old boy could have known these obscure, deeply buried facts about this World War II aircraft carrier, small World War II pocket aircraft carrier, and its company. Now, when we left we had just begun to talk about a certain very special individual. Why don't you tell me exactly who this was?
Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, the person that we were finally able to figure out who our son had remembered being was a young man named James M. Houston, Jr. There was another little piece of information that James, well, it's actually something he started doing. He started drawing shortly after his 3rd birthday, or right around the time he turned 3. And he just started this series of hundreds and hundreds of drawings of planes getting shot down, and they were very specific, detailed drawings, very retro. The planes had propellers on them. They had the correct insignias, and he would draw planes, and he would draw boats, and he would start shooting back and forth, and until the whole drawing was completely scribbled up with all these lines and flak and explosions and people. It was like watching someone, drawing out a movie. And then he'd toss it aside and do another one. But he started signing them James 3. And Bruce asked him, how come you're signing your name James 3? Obviously, with a father named Bruce, he's not a junior. But James said, because I'm the 3rd James. And that was kind of curious to us. So a couple of years into the research process, Bruce finally ended up going to a Natoma Bay reunion. And through sifting through all the artifacts and the records that they had there, he found that only one pilot who served on Natoma Bay had been killed during the battle for Iwo Jima, and that was James M. Houston, Jr. And when he told me that it was Junior, I just started screaming, that's it. That would make James 3.
So, yeah, because at this point, the two of you, Bruce, were very concerned about the reality of this because you thought that your son had said his name was Jack Larson and that he had flown Corsairs, and you knew by this time no Corsairs had ever flown off the Natoma, and he couldn't have been Jack Larson because Jack Larson was still alive. So here you have this incredibly schizophrenic situation where your son has some impossible information that's right and some information that's wrong.
But the one thing that was crazy when Bruce went to that reunion, he had that document about James M. Houston, Jr. being shot down. There was a diagram of where the planes were flying, and that diagram's in the book.
Right. Oh, yes.
And the person who was flying right next to James M. Houston, Jr. was Jack Larson.
Which is extraordinary. And tell the story, please, of seeing the face. That I believe it was Jack Larson who was the last person to see his face.
No, that was a guy named John Richardson.
Oh, that's right. He was from an entirely different flight. That's right. Well, tell us that story. It's an extraordinary story.
Well, one of the things that was baffling, and I actually didn't receive the information that described exactly what happened to Houston until after I had visited with Jack Larson. As a matter of fact, it came like two days afterward. I had found out about Houston being killed at the reunion, but didn't have any real details until I had the Word Diary of BC-81 sent to me. But what wound up happening is one of the things that was confusing and well, you said schizophrenic, which is a good word when it comes to some of this stuff, was that I couldn't find anything definitive. It said apparently shot down and crashed in the harbor. It didn't say exactly what happened, and it was referring to something almost secondhand.
Right.
And when I came home from the reunion, I put a posting on a website, a really obscure website, about that event that day, and 9 months later got a phone call from a guy named Jack Durham, who said, I looked at my logbook and I flew a mission at Chichijima with aircraft from Natoma Bay that day, and we saw a guy get shot down. Well, as a result of that, I wound up discovering that there were 4 eyewitnesses that were still alive at that point. Right now there's only 1. And they were all able to describe exactly what happened to Houston's plane in the same kind of detail that James described. He said his plane got hit in the engine. On ABC Primetime, a guy named Ralph Clarbord described exactly what he saw where the plane got hit in the engine. But as it turned out, there was a guy named John Richardson who was by the time I met him dying of Parkinson's disease, and he saw Houston's plane out of the corner of his eye just as Houston's plane got hit, and Houston and he caught eyes, and the face of Houston was trapped in John Richardson's mind, and he had nightmares for years saying, I don't know who that man was, but I saw him die, never having known who it was until I met him and showed him the picture. And it was closure for Richardson.
And it was the story of Houston's father coming to the Natoma reunions back in the 60s is very poignant because he never got that closure.
That's right. None of these records that I was able to get access to were declassified until I think it was 1979.
Yes.
And it was at that point that you could get microfilm copies, and I actually obtained 9 rolls of microfilm of the entire ship's record.
Now, this is very important, folks, because in the back of some of the minds of listeners are going to be, oh, they made this whole thing up. This is telling you they couldn't have.
Right.
It was impossible. It could not have been made up.
Right.
No, it couldn't.
And that was the gradual trail that I came to, in the work that I do, I have to build straw horses and knock them down all the time to make sure I'm getting to the facts I need to do the things I need to do for my living. And I did the same thing here. As much as Andrea and everybody gloated over the fact that I was a pighead about James Houston or Corsairs or eyewitnesses, I had to be my own devil's advocate because, first of all, it was testing everything I believed in. And then at every turn, there's nothing I ever found that refuted anything my son ever said. And I don't have it just because of someone's opinion. I have it cross-referenced to military documents or eyewitness accounts or both. And it's not just based on my opinion.
Well, James is always adamant that he flew a Corsair, and that was Bruce's ace in the hole.
Right. The one thing he had left at this point.
Yeah, he was like, well, what about even when we knocked down, when everything had been verified, he was still stuck on the Corsair thing. Well, what about the Corsair? That means that this is all a bunch of baloney. So I was like, oh, good grief. Are we ever going to be able to get, verify this enough for you to just believe it and move on with your life? So, that's when I started we decided we were going to write a book about Natoma Bay, or my husband was going to write a book about the Natoma, because he'd gotten so, obsessed with the ship and the men he was speaking to. He really felt like that story needed to be told. So we started researching, trying to find family members of people to kind of get more information about who these men really were. Bruce had so much information, and one thing that was really disturbing to us is most of these men had been missing in action. So it wasn't until a year after their death that they were finally declared dead, that the families never knew what the actual cause of their loved ones passing was. Did they die did their plane run out of gas?
Right.
Did they get shot down in combat? Did they have a midair collision? They never knew what happened. So
we all need closure when somebody dies.
Exactly.
A good friend of mine died last night, in fact, very mysteriously at the age of 34.
Oh.
And I'm dying to find out. I mean, to
You
find
wanna
out
know
what
why?
happened.
What
happened? We all feel that, of course.
So, the big tragedy was that these families had gone up 50 over 50 years without knowing what happened to their loved one.
Right.
They just disappeared off the planet, and you got a yellow telegram that said, "We're sorry, his remains are not recovered."
Yes.
So Bruce really felt compelled to give as much information to these families as possible, and that's what he did. And in the process of doing that, that's how I found Ann Barron, James Houston's sister. Now,
That's
one of the
right.
reasons I was able to locate
and here's we're gonna take a break because we're just about to go to our last episode with you guys, and I want this extraordinary story of their meeting with the sister of the man who their son is the reincarnation of. I don't want to interrupt it, so we're going to take a little break right now.
Okay.
You're listening to Dreamland's unique blend of information and ideas.
We're back. We're talking to Bruce and Andrea Leininger. Their book, Soul Survivor, The Reincarnation of a World War II Fighter Pilot. Their son. Their website, soulsurvivor-book.com. That's soulsurvivor-book.com. And now we're at the point where you have actually found the sister of the man who you are at this point quite sure your own little boy is the reincarnation of. What was this like?
It was so crazy, I can't even tell you. You know, it was weird because we knew why we were contacting or trying to find Anne. James remembered things about his family. He knew he had two sisters. He remembered Annie the best. And he said, I had a sister, Anne. We called her Annie, but I had another sister older than that. And I said, what was her name? And he said, Ruth. I said, Ruth? He goes, no, Ruth. He goes, Ruth was 4 years older than Annie, and Annie was 4 years older than me. So I started trying to research a family that fit that scenario, and when
very hard to do when it comes to the female side, of course.
It's very hard to research the female side because people get married and moved on. But I started with the census record for Pennsylvania. I knew from the death record that that's where James Houston had originated from. So I was able to find that. And then in the census record, I found a family that matched James McCready Houston Sr., James McCready Houston Jr., oldest sister Ruth, 4 years younger sister Annie, 4 years younger was James. So that was, I'm like, this has to be it.
Yeah.
It took a long time to try and locate Anne. It was a lot of research, but I finally did locate her. And first thing we did was, I told her that we were writing a book. Of course, I couldn't say, your dead brother is my son.
No.
So I told her about just researching the book and wanting to get some photos and documents and information. And about a week later, this big package of information came in the mail, and I opened it up, and I was so excited. I called Bruce and said, you've got to come home from work right now. You've got to see this. So he came in. There was, several pictures of James Houston, just military headshots, just your chest and up.
Right.
But he looked exactly like James. He looked just like my son.
To a great extent, it's true. You see it in the book.
Yeah. They look extremely similar.
Yes.
And then there was two pictures of James Houston standing next to a Corsair.
Right.
And that just sent Bruce.
Which is astonishing because well, go ahead.
That was Bruce's ace in the hole. And here was James Houston, and he's like, what is he doing with a Corsair? And I said, we've got to figure that out.
And, it was one of those things where when I saw the pictures, term cognitive dissonance, you're seeing something,
right.
You can't process it. It was like something came crashing in from the past. And again, it's another place where I get goosebumps. And as it turns out, I'm going to do something out of character. Happy birthday, Annie. It's October 23rd. I hope you're listening.
Oh, happy birthday, Annie.
Yeah, she's 91.
Wow.
But anyway, so when we saw those photos, that was truly the last straw horse that we had in terms of my arguments against why this could happen or how it could happen or if it did happen. That was the last.
It did happen. It had to have happened. At this point, this it's not possible to believe it didn't happen. It did happen, and that
Right.
gets me.
Right.
We're kind of coming toward the end of the show, and folks, there is much more about this incredible story in their book. We've got about 10 minutes left, though, and I want to shift gears a little bit. First, I want to mention to you in passing that early Christianity, before about 300 AD, reincarnation was accepted as part of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It was the great Christian theologian Origen took it for granted. And it wasn't until after about 300 that writers began to say that this should not be part of Christianity. So you go back to the earliest Christians, they had no problem with it. That needs to be remembered, I think, for Christians listening to this, that our ancient religion has had a lot of history and especially its earliest, purest history, where this wasn't anathema in Christianity, not disbelieved at all. So we need to revisit this theologically as well.
Now, one thing I wanted to get, I had meant to tell you this before when we got on the story of Billy, Walter, and Leon, and somehow I didn't get to finish the statement that I was going to make about something that James said, with remembering that that's who met him when he got to heaven.
Right.
The next day, he was playing in the sunroom, and I went and sat and talked to him, and I said, James, you were telling me yesterday about Billy, Walter, and Leon, and that's who met you when you got to heaven. And he says, uh-huh. And I said, is there really a heaven? And he said, yes, Mama, there's a heaven. And I said, is there really a God? And he says, yes, there really is a God. And I thought, this is my only chance to ask this question. I said, is God a man or a woman? And he goes, he's not a man or a woman. He's whoever you need him to be at the time.
Wow. I bet that certainly has the ring of truth. Did he say anything about what heaven was like?
He just said it was the most beautiful place ever. And I said, well, how is it beautiful? Is it like a beautiful garden? And he goes, I can't really say how it's beautiful. It's just the most beautiful place ever. I just can't tell you how it is.
Now, he has come on an extraordinary mission. He's
Right.
come on a mission to help us open our eyes. And this is an incredible mission, and he came specifically to the two of you. And you have asked him about this. Could you tell us the story of how he answered?
Go ahead, Bruce, you can tell that story.
Well, my answer about all of it is he's been raised as a Christian. I'm a Christian. I was baffled by this because I didn't believe that reincarnation was possible, but, there's nothing that I was able to find that ran counter to the belief that our spirits go on forever.
That's a very Christian idea, too.
Right.
I mean,
and the whole, Christians spend their lives chasing salvation. And what was an epiphany for me is that my faith versus facts clash. My faith was, no, it couldn't happen, but the facts were telling me it was. And at the end of the day, I could discover nothing that ran counter to my Christian belief. If anything, it took what I thought to be a two-dimensional belief system and made it three-dimensional.
Right.
It put some depth to it. We really don't know what's going to happen when our spirits leave this body.
well, but we know more, I think.
Right.
Because
but now we know more
Yeah.
because of this story. And for him to come back, I believe that, part of it is to not be forgotten. That all of these men that were forgotten, that were in an obscure place in a few people's memories, that they've been brought back to us. And that's one of the reasons why we dedicated the book to their lives.
To their lives, yes.
And the healing that's taken place amongst the families, the things that people now feel about more welcoming of the fact that their souls and their spirits go on.
Yes.
No matter, I don't know what the judgment is. I'm still trying to figure out where this fits into that whole scheme.
I found myself thinking about that late last night too. Where am I in all of this? And since I know now, for this, because of this and some other things that I'm going to go on, we're all going to go on, we have to ask ourselves some very serious questions about, our lives. And
that's right. And one of those things, a lot of people say, well, if it's on the Eastern religion, it's karma, and you keep doing this over and over again until you get it right. My response to that is, you're a good interviewer. And when you decided that you wanted to do this for your living, did you want to become as good at it as you could as quickly as possible?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I see where you're going.
I'm just going to keep doing this and screwing it up until I get it right. Well, it's the same thing here. If I knew, or if I have faith that my spirit goes on, then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to be as good at this as I can be, because if I'm going to get another shot at it, maybe it'll be to come back and enlighten other people, which is what James has done. He's enlightened.
Yes, he's come back and done this. He's a very enlightening human being.
That's right.
What's he like now? I mean, having gone through this with my own son in another context, I understand that you're probably keeping him rather isolated from this whole thing. How does he react to it now?
Well, you're right. We actually were very careful with James the whole time we started doing all the research. We never told James we were researching any of this, or we just wanted to make sure. I think most of all, we wanted
a chance to grow up as a normal little boy, of course.
Right. We don't want him thinking that there's something different about him, anything like that. But most of all, we wanted to make sure that when he did give us a piece of information and he wasn't regurgitating something he heard us say, we wanted to be sure that if he came up with a detail or something, that it was based on something that he was coming up with, not something he overheard us talking about. So I know we were really, really careful about that. But James now is, he is a typical 11-year-old. He doesn't put his clothes in the hamper. He would rather play video games than do his homework. He's a little absent-minded. He's just your typical 11-year-old.
A regular kid.
He's loving this experience. He's loving the travel. He gets tired of the question, do you remember anything?
Right, yes.
Because he says that he doesn't remember anything, that it's all kind of gone to him.
That's just like my son had some extraordinary experiences, and now at the age of 30 remembers absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Well, there's this part of me that thinks he might still...
But he doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, I think he doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah,
it's exactly where I am with my son. Yeah.
He'll deal with it. For instance, a regression analysis or something like that, because we've had a number of people propose, in some cases, pretty bizarre stuff, although more about this. But
some past life regression can be effective, I think. I did one once, and it's upset me so much I still can't listen to it. My wife has listened to it, but not me.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I can't. It was not a good life, and I just couldn't handle it. I want to go, before we're coming to the end of our time together, I want you to talk to us about the Pink Hotel and what that was all about.
Well, we were cleaning up after Hurricane Lily, and we were cleaning up leaves and stuff like that, and I just called him over. We took a rest, and I said, come on over and let me give you a hug. I want to love on you. You're such a great little boy. And he came trotting over out of the pile of leaves and hopped on my lap. He said, I knew you'd be a good daddy when I picked you. And at that point, he'd done enough of this that I said, I better get ready for something. Something's coming.
Yep.
And I said, what do you mean when you found it? He said, well, when I found you and Mommy, and I knew you'd be good parents. I said, well, where did you find us? He said, I found you in Hawaii. I said, no. I said, we had just gone to Hawaii several months later after we sold the company I'd worked for in 2002. And I said, no, we were there with Grammy. The Forbes were in Hawaii. He says, no. He said, it was just you and Mommy. And I said, okay. I said, well, where were we? He said, you were at a Big Pink Hotel. Now, we stayed on the Big Island when we took him to Hawaii. And I said, Big Pink Hotel, and I just about swallowed my tongue. I felt my brain shrinking. And what wound up happening is I said, well, where did you find us at the Big Pink Hotel? He said, well, you were eating dinner at night out at the beach. Well, for our 50th anniversary, we went to Hawaii in 1997, in May and June of 1997, and we stayed at the Hawaiian Princess.
The Royal Hawaiian.
The Royal Hawaiian, which is, of course, a Big Pink Hotel.
Honolulu, which is coral pink.
Yeah.
And we had dinner out on the beach one night, and we were there 6 weeks before he was conceived.
So he found you.
He found us on the beach at night.
Absolutely fascinating, folks, because what you've got here is really a window into an aspect of life and reality that has been hidden from us for a long time.
Yep.
Suddenly, here it is, and you can see the image of a soul looking for a place to be reborn, for people he would like to be reborn to.
Yep.
And on some level, God must have known, Bruce, that you and Andrea, that you guys were really going to dig into this, because I don't think it's an accident.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident
Not
either.
at all.
When we started doing the whole story and researching, I thought, he picked us for a reason. He came back because he wanted to tell this story.
Exactly.
Maybe, there's, if any of your listeners go to our website, they will be fascinated, because James's story, and one of the reasons I wanted to tell the stories, is I wanted to hear from more parents who maybe, I didn't think that what he was experiencing was that unusual. I thought it probably happens with
Of course, I'm sure it happens all the time.
But parents just don't listen to their kids, or they write it off as, just a vivid imagination.
And their website is soulsurvivor-book.com. Their book is Soul Survivor, the Reincarnation of a World War II Fighter Pilot, the very finest book of its kind ever written. It has completely convinced me that this is real. And we have unfortunately come to the end of our time together. They are going to be talking also now in the subscriber section with our very extraordinary and powerful Dreamland resident psychic, Marla Fries. And so those of you who are subscribers, do listen to them. And if you're not a subscriber, come on, what are you waiting for? Any of us who are tired of and ceasing to believe the relentlessly materialistic description of human life that is fed to us from earliest childhood, I will tell you from my own personal experiences, who read my website, who read unknowncountry.com, I have come to believe for personal reasons in an afterlife. But this story, I think, frankly, Bruce and Andrea, I think this story proves reincarnation. And welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Well, I must first say, the amount of effort that these people have put into finding out the mystery behind their little boy's amazing memories is truly heroic. I mean, you guys worked and worked and worked. Bruce, I've never read anything as obsessive. You worked, guys. That was very impressive.
It was a lot of work, but it was a labor of love, and it was a labor of really wanting to make sure that whatever it was that our son was experiencing, and when we first started going through this whole scenario with James, right after his second birthday is when it all started, our ultimate goal was that whatever he was going through or was experiencing, that we could somehow help him resolve this, and that he would not have any fears or phobias, that he would just grow up and be healthy and normal without any, weird paranoias
or
being self-conscious about anything.
Yes. Well, now let's go back to that period.
Okay.
He's 2, and he's something began to happen. Could you tell us what that was like right at the beginning when this began to manifest itself in your lives?
Well, it really started, I think what really caught my attention first was when he started having the nightmares, which started about 2 weeks after his second birthday. But even before that, James had a love for airplanes. And initially,
video called, it's a kind of magic at an air museum that I took him to shortly before we came here to Lafayette. And he would stand in front of that video for hours and hours. It got to the point to where he would be grunting and groaning with the pilot as they were watching the pilots fly in the cockpit. And so all of these things were disturbing. The comments about the airplane crash going on the way to the airport, that was not that made me mad.
Of course it did. It'd
Don't
make you
say
very
that.
mad. But you must have been quite curious about why he would keep saying that.
Well,
it was baffling, yeah. It was very baffling.
You know, and initially it started with the nightmares. You know, the first time he had one, I never heard a nightmare like that. I mean, everyone who has a small child knows that they cry in the night and you go take care of them. I had never heard a nightmare where it sounded like he was being, like someone was killing him, like he was being attacked. You know, I have a nephew. I know of other little boys or little girls. They love dolls, or they love trucks, or they love Thomas the Tank Engine. You know, they fall in love with something. James fell in love with planes. He loved planes from the first time he looked out the window of the car seat and saw one flying overhead. He was fascinated. So even by his second birthday, he received a lot of airplane gifts.
Now, however, fascinated is one way to put it. Another way to put it is to ask you a question, Bruce. How did you feel when he kept saying every time you started out on a journey, Daddy's airplane crash, big fire?
Well, that was unsettling, and there were actually two other things that, you know, were baffling, and one of them was unsettling. He also had a behavior where with his toy airplanes, he would incessantly crash them into a coffee table that we had in the family room, and it would go on and on for hours. The other thing that he would do is I bought him a Blue Angel.
Today, folks, you're going to hear the most extraordinary story of reincarnation that has ever been told in human history. There are one or two other stories that I know of from Western people in the West that are almost as compelling, but there is nothing quite like the story you are going to hear about a boy called James Leininger. The book his parents, Bruce and Andrea, have written about him and about his experience is called Soul Survivor, the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. And I have to tell you frankly, usually when I do an interview, I will perhaps skim the book, read it. I give it about 2 hours. I started this book yesterday afternoon when I had a couple of hours of time set aside for it. I finished reading and rereading it at 1 o'clock in the morning. This is an incredible, life-changing experience to